Before we start today's podcast, I want to share with you something that happened to me this morning. So, I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, the upper Midwest, and we are heading towards fall. In between my house and studio is the green room. It's a little garden area with pavers and flowers. By this time of the summer, the bee balm looks like battle-worn soldiers. Most of their petals are gone, except for a few stragglers hanging from their lumpy, bald heads. All of a sudden, this big, fuzzy bumblebee zeroes in to find and get what it needs. Whoa, knock, knock, who's there? A gentle message from the universe. That's it. Let's go back to the podcast. Fill to capacity. Crazy good stories and timely topics. Podcast for people too stubborn to quit and too creative not to make a difference. Inspiring, irreverent, and informative. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Pat Benincasa, and welcome to Fill to Capacity. Today's episode, Creative Aging, the Powerful Intersection Between Life and Art. And my guest is Lynda Monick-Isenberg. And just to give you a very brief bio, Lynda Monick-Isenberg is a visual artist with a passion for making art and teaching art. She is Professor Emeritus at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, also called MCAD. She started the first of its kind teaching artist program at MCAD, and the multi-talented Monick-Isenberg draws, paints, and weaves with over 100 fiber commissions nationally. Her work is included in the Weissman Museum, Minnesota History Center, and the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and many other private collections. So welcome, Lynda. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm just so excited to be here, Pat. I really admire all this work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. And boy, we have lots to talk about. Now, this brief bio doesn't cover half of what you've accomplished as artist, educator, facilitator, and mentor. You have touched many, many lives. And today I want to focus on an aspect of your work with arts and aging. So let's start. Lynda, what is this thing called creative aging? Will you describe it for us?
Well, I'll sure try to do it justice. This is a fairly new movement in our society. I think in the world, we're seeing this also taking place across our oceans, where we're really thinking about that age group of 55 and better, we call it. People who find themselves maybe disconnected with a life that they've lived in the past, where they've retired, their kids have grown. We stay healthier and more well and more active, into our 80s, 90s than any other generation.
Yeah.
And this is a time that either people find that they have time to really attend to those creative energies that they've had in the past, and they find an openness in their life and a place to make and think about art in a way that maybe they haven't been able to earlier in their lives. We're also finding with this kind of work that we are creating communities for people that are often isolated, that these communities working through a creative process together enriches lives so that they have more friendships, they have more connections, they take less medication, they're more active, and they're healthier because of the creative thinking and the creative making that they're doing.
So let me ask you, what motivated you to work with older adults?
I wondered that myself, Pat. I've always worked with children, but what I have found is being the oldest of 7 children back in the 60s, My mom had 7 kids in 10 years, and I was the older one. So I was always the teacher in the family, right? There was a lot, those of us that were in those kinds of situations, and there were a lot of us back then, were the ones that were the leaders, and we were the responsible ones. And as my husband says, I've always been a very good lieutenant. So I went into teaching early on. Actually, I wanted to go into art, and my parents demanded, as a young woman going into college, first run of our generation, really completing college, that I had some kind of career.
Yep.
When I was through, and they were right. And I was a good teacher, and I started out teaching kids. Went on to start these programs, both at the College of Visual Art in St. Paul was the initial program, because I had been out working as a teaching artist for Compass.
By the way, Compass, which stands for Community Programs in the Arts, is a nonprofit that helps connect people through the arts in schools, community and recreation centers, hospitals, clinics, festivals, and senior centers.
And early on, Compass was doing work which they called geriatric work, and we don't use that terminology anymore. But I was working in a nursing home, and I was working with kids in parks, and I was working with teens with chemical dependency issues, and I was working with children and teens that were deaf. So I was doing all this teaching artist work back in the 80s that kind of led me into thinking about how do we train artists to go out and do this work. So I became a teacher and a trainer of young artists to become teaching artists. And then I was lucky enough to be called on by a friend to work in an organization called Engage, run by Tim Carpenter. And this was out of California, and they were doing some work here about 7 years ago with an organization called Common Bond, who does affordable housing for 55 plus. This is a long story. Sorry, Pat.
No, that's okay. But I am going to ask you a bit later about Common Bond. Okay?
Yep. That's when I did my first class with the Drawing Project, which was another organization with a former student I was running. And I just fell in love with it. I mean, that was the key, was once I started working with, I love teaching, first of all.
I know you do.
And we've taught together. Once I started working with older adults and I saw the passion and the capability, I had carried around all of these thoughts about aging that were as unrealistic as I try to disprove today.
Well, now
So-
wait, let me stop you there, because you said something that you just walked into my next question. You said, quote, there is this misunderstanding culturally that people who age, 1, can't learn, 2, don't want to learn, and we hide them away and they become invisible. Is that what you're talking about?
Pretty much it.
So you had, I think you said it succinctly in this statement, that in this culture, it seems that we almost don't know what to do with older adults. And so, because we make assumptions about them. And as you say, we're living longer, and older adults are living. They want to live. They want to engage. So that brings me to a study that was done in 2006 by Gene Cohen, the Creativity and Aging Study, the impact of professionally conducted cultural programs on older adults. And that study showed that older adults in social environments doing activities where they were creatively engaged with mastering skills had positive psychological, physical, and emotional benefits. Lynda, does this finding register with your own experience?
It not only registers with my own experience, but it is a study that I have really taken a deep look at. And the one additional piece to that study is how it breaks isolation. And so not only are you teaching sequentially skill-based programming that's working with creative problem solving, but you're doing it not one-on-one on a computer, not one-on-one as a mentor-mentee, but within a group of people that creates a creative community. And this community piece is also incredibly essential to that model. The other piece that's essential to that model, which has been overlooked, I think, in our communities, is that the other piece of that, which you mentioned, is that these are professional teaching artists.
Yes.
These are professional artists. These are not our lovely people that come in and just are wonderful volunteers who come in to work with older adults. These are professionals that teach in a professional modality, that teach professional skills and believe deeply in the ability of everybody to learn and to make and to be creative.
Oh, that's an important point. Now, before we go any further, I want to point out that the term elderly has been replaced with older adults. Is this new descriptor more accurate, where elderly sounds almost dismissive? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it really plays into this idea of ageism, right?
Yeah.
And ageism is prevalent within ourselves. We are trained early on to be ageist. It's prevalent throughout our society. It's something we teach ourselves and we teach our children. And it's something that we really need to step back, just like all of those other isms, racism, all these other isms that we have. We have to step back and look, because everybody does this. Every one of it. It is our goal when we are born to age.
Yep.
Right?
Everybody's going to do it.
That's our goal in life, is to get old, right?
It is. But one of the beauties of getting older is that each decade is a revelation with wisdom and insights that each decade I crank over. I just am amazed at how much I've learned and I've absorbed. And as folks get older, there's so many life experiences, so much richness to tap into.
And one of the things that I find in the classes that I teach is this incredible sense of humor and this flexibility that we don't expect. You know, we have these prejudgments about what it means to be an older adult. And we think of people being inflexible and not creative and uninterested and rather bored and ill and sick.
Yep.
And even though some of these things may happen, creative aging programming really unpacks that and opens it up, opens our lives up so that we continue and create even a more fulfilled life.
Ah, nicely said. So that brings me to the organization called Common Bond. And you started to touch on it. And I know that you mentioned that their focus is on community building, but they also say that the arts are a major component to this. You started to talk about that. Can you tell us more?
Well, Common Bond's a fascinating organization because they do affordable housing for all ages and all people across the United States. They're a massive organization that I think many people don't know about. In every neighborhood, I now find a Common Bond affordable housing community that's just kind of nested within the neighborhood in a really lovely way that you don't notice. It's just part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I like their philosophy. They have worked very, very diligently to bring the arts to their affordable housing communities. Now, the affordable housing communities is my understanding, but it's generally people who they're single apartments for single people who really live on Social Security. And they generally are living on Social Security, not because they haven't worked. I have worked with ad executives. I've worked with professors. I have worked with teachers. I have worked with people that have worked their lives driving school buses or working in kitchens, or hard-working people. And what is generally, as I've sort of unpacked with them, they were sick before they were 55. All of their savings got used up for medical, or they were left in a situation because of death or divorce in a way that they no longer had assets. So these are often women that I'm working with in Common Bond. That doesn't mean that only women are there, but it's generally more of a female population. And it is just one of the most wonderful experiences to go in and work in these Common Bond communities. And I've been fully supported by Common Bond, who has been supported by E.A. Mickelson Philanthropy to do this work. And Ellen Mickelson, who's actually from St. Paul, funds this work across the United States. It's really important work that a lot of people haven't paid any attention to.
So I see that with Common Bond, they say, quote, through our arts and aging program, we use the arts as a vehicle for lifelong learning and community building. So my question to you, Lynda, how does their work, like when folks do this artwork, their artistry, how does that fold back into the community? What's the relationship between their making art and the community?
That is such an important question, Pam, because that is essentially one of the most important aspects of creative aging programming is building community. You can be so isolated as a person, and even during COVID, that this has really hurt communities. We have worked really hard during COVID to create online programming and support that, but that's sort of a whole nother place right now. And it's been very successful. We've broken through that assumption that people 55 and over can't use a computer, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. We all learn and we keep learning. But anyway, this idea of community is we build the community through the art making in the class. It's not that we come in and have a cup of coffee together and talk about what's happening in our life. That kind of thing happens, but we're doing it based on learning, based on development, and based at looking at creative problem solving. This creates really different connections.
Yeah.
The one thing that's happened through COVID, which has been really fascinating, is because of online programming, we've been able to move across the common bond housing. So there's housing in all of the suburbs in Minneapolis. Right now, I just finished a program called Click Photography, an Introduction to Digital Photography, with a smartphone. And we did this with 5 different sites and create a camera club together.
Nice.
So after I'm done teaching, the community often will stay together and make art together and be crit groups together.
Oh, that's wonderful. And also, this past winter, you did a class called Collage, From Scraps to Works of Art. Tell us about that class. What happened? Excuse me, before we
ahead.
go any further, will you please explain what collage is for people who may be unfamiliar with that term?
Well, collage is taken from the French word coller, which means using paper to create pasting papers is what it really is. So it's very simply finding images using found usually flat objects in collage and creating something from those objects that would be two-dimensional design. It might be a narrative. It might be an abstract. It might be a remade portrait. There's just a whole lot of things that collage can do. It can really open creative thinking. I decided to try this class because I was starting to do some collage. I haven't done a lot of it myself, and I was just finding it so refreshing and so much fun and very fast. So I didn't have to have all of my drawing skills or painting skills or so many materials around me. I could just cut and paste and start making decisions as I went. So we studied composition, we studied other people's collages, and we shared. I would set up a challenge, I call it, each week. I'd give them a challenge. They would create outside of class, they would send it to me in between classes, and then we would show it and we would talk about the work. And the way that we talked about it wasn't a college critique or high school or college critique class. It really came from, what did you notice about this work? So really thinking about observation. How did this piece make you feel? So really connecting with who we are as human beings. See how we start to build a community there. We start to talk about our feelings. What does it remind you of? Are there metaphors in there? Are there stories there? We start sharing our stories together. And then finally, what do you think the artist was doing with this piece? What's your conjecture here? What are you speculating on? And this has been a really great model for us because they can all do this.
So let me stop you here for a moment, Lynda. Will you tell us the structure? This was a Zoom class, a remote class?
Yes, this was remote.
With how many students?
I think we had between 8 and 10 students.
Okay. And then you said, quote, participants explored personal themes, visual storytelling, color, design, and humor in reassembled newfound materials. Lynda, what kind of visual stories came out of this class?
This was the real surprise to me. And this was what made me look at my own biases, because what really popped out were political issues.
Really?
the things that we all have shied away from talking to each other about.
Mm-hmm.
They found a freedom to really talk about their philosophy, about what's happening in the world, and create images that would speak to that. And it was such an insight for me to honor what it was, for them to be able to share what they were thinking in a supportive atmosphere
Yes.
without judgment. And it was absolutely, it was startling to me, and it shouldn't have been, but it was, again, me facing my own biases and ageism that's built within
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. I read that quote, art taps into parts of the brain that sometimes talking just can't do. It unlocks things that are hidden and allows people to explore and communicate emotions that just can't be verbalized. And I think that's what you're talking, that your students tapped into a freedom of expression that your environment, and you are a master teacher and you have a way of making students feel welcome, relaxed, and non-judged. So in that environment, it sounds like your students were able to create in visual form things that they might not just talk about.
That's it exactly, Pat. And the other thing that happened was they began, in some of the challenges I gave was a challenge to look back into their life and create a collage about their life. And they started to remember stories about their lives that they had totally forgotten, because you know how it is. It's a smell that comes, or it's a color that hits you, or it's the way the light connects, where whole stories of who they were unfolded in a collage. And then we would look at it and we would unpack it, right?
Yeah.
And we could see it and we would say it and they would shine.
Oh, that's beautiful. Let me ask you a different type of question. When you go to start a class, do you encounter folks who think that, well, I'm not really creative, or look, I don't have any stories to tell. I just live my life. Do you run into that?
Every time. Every time we do it, you and I know that this happens with our 6-year-olds, and it happens with our 100-year-olds, right?
Yes. But when people often label themselves as, well, uncreative, I just did this or I just did that. But when they start talking about the way they cook, or their gardening, or their quilting, or things that they organized, bringing people together, I just think folks don't realize how incredibly creative they are. The artist doesn't own creativity. We all have it. But in your situation, you have to create the environment where they feel like they can try these things and not be embarrassed by that.
And absolutely, you are so right on there. It is about small steps and sequential learning. So it's the first thing that they do we always have to build success into the very first project, right?
Oh, yes.
So that we build that trust. And then when you set up the scaffolding of response to the work, so it's not about, do I like something? Do I judge something? Is this good or bad? We don't care about any of that. We talk about that right away. The other thing I do, just what you were saying earlier, is I start pointing out that they have designed their entire lives. They create a room for comfort. They choose colors. And when I'm remote, I can see into their houses. So I can point out, I can say, I see that you're wearing the same color that's on your wall. That must be a really important color to you. I'm wondering what it reminds you of, or what it makes you think of, or how you feel about that color. So you can start to point out where they're already making design decisions and compositional decisions. You put the couch over there, you put the light over there, you made choices. So, and isn't that what design's about? Is about making choices and changing your mind.
Yes. Yes.
That's what collage could do so easily, So anytime you put a piece of paper down, you could move it, you could change it, you could paste over it, you could pull it up. It just gave them so much latitude.
Did you find the fact that you were teaching remotely on Zoom a barrier, or did you find ways, like you're talking about now, Did you find that it was offering you creative license as a teacher? So my question is, was it a barrier? Did you use it to your advantage?
Well, I was back in the classroom this spring for the first time. So I went back in and taught a weaving class and a painting with pencil class, and which was just so rewarding to be with people. But I sort of forgot how to teach in person because I'd been 2 years teaching online. So I had to relearn some things that I have. It's much easier for me to teach. This may sound odd, easier for me to teach remotely because everything is ready. I have everything here. I know where in my little studio space, I can pull out anything at any time. I have all my books over here. I have I have things everywhere. It's just different. It offers you different opportunities. I can have more built community within teaching in person. It's easier for me to build community. It's more difficult to build that community online, and it takes a different kind of work. Online, I can give more personalized feedback, and we can give more feedback than when we're working in person. So there's benefits in both of them, and I think that there's people that like the different models, and that really excel in the different models.
Good point. You once said, quote, "I went into arts and aging because I was afraid of aging. I wanted to figure out, how do you do this with grace?" Lynda, what have you figured out?
I'm still working on that, Pat. Oh, the most wonderful thing is, I started this in my mid 60s, and I'm older than a lot of my students now, which shocks me, because I still think I'm, like the rest of us, we don't think of ourselves, as older. I think what I've learned is the power of the creative mind. And I think what it's done for me is allowed me not to worry about perfection so much, or that my work, my own personal work has to be a certain thing. It's allowed me to dabble over here and try that and just get excited about something new and not worry so much about my outcomes. To really, and even though I've taught for years about the process, the outcomes were always really, honestly, very essential to me. Pretend that wasn't true is not fair. I don't worry so much about that anymore. I'm much more interested in being entertained by the work itself as I'm making it, and the joy of the making. And the other thing that I've learned is that I am not interested in doing this alone, that I need a community. As much as my students need that community, I need that community. And as a professional artist, I don't know about you, but it's hard to find that supportive community in the same way once you're not within the schools, the college, the school community itself, once you are outside of that. And so what I've learned is no one's going to build that community for me.
No.
I need to build that community. I can help other people build a community. I can also step into those communities. Just because I've been a professional doesn't mean a darn thing.
Yeah.
Arts and aging for me has been a real evener. How can I say that? It evens the playing field.
Yes.
It's a democracy. Nobody is better than anybody else. Everybody is where they are.
What's happened is it's dissolved the notion of gatekeeper. Everybody can sit at the table. You don't need a curator or a director to say, wait, I'll take your piece, but not this. It's everybody's at the table. And then if you want to show your work, you can show it online. You don't have to wait for that call or try to hustle out your work. As younger artists, I think for me, I was always thinking, outcome. Okay. Because we wanted to get our work out and be recognized. And now you and I are the same age. And I find that as I've gotten older, Lynda, my edit button is gone. I don't know where it is. And what that means is all of a sudden I too am reveling in process. That the process is so rich and full. When I make what so-called mistakes in my work, I try things and they dead end. It's like, I think, okay, that didn't work. Well, as a younger artist, I think, oh, that didn't work. What am I going to do now? Now I'm thinking, okay, that didn't work. And it's playful. It's almost like there's a point where we can celebrate the making, the creativity, the joy, the foibles. It's all part of the package.
I love the word playful. I'm so glad you said that, because that's really how I like to think about it, because we know that how a young child learns. I'm sitting in a kind of funny place in my life where I have brand new grandchildren and I have aging parents.
Okay.
I'm still lucky enough to have aging parents. So I sit in between these odd generations.
Yes.
At 70, there's not a lot of us in that. I'm lucky. But what I notice is the playfulness of my 4-year-old granddaughter. There's a similarity to that, to the playfulness that I'm experiencing in my studio and that my Common Bond students are experiencing in our work. Play is how we learn. Play is how we problem solve. Play brings us joy. Play lets it go. We don't judge play.
No.
Right? There's no judgment in play. That's bad play, Quit playing that way.
That's right.
So it really is key, this idea of being playful. And I think that's where some of that humor comes from, that I've been able to participate in with my students. And it just makes life gracious to live.
Yes.
When you have that sense of humor and that laughter every day that you're working.
I think that when a teacher embodies that kind of joy and playfulness, there's something very contagious. I hate to use that word in this culture, but there's something very powerful about it spreading into the classroom or the Zoom when a teacher really has that joy of process and experimentation, and knowing that whatever we try, it's a magnificent gesture. It's a defiance against perfectionism. It's saying we are so much more than this notion of what is perfect art. I once had a student in high school, an art class. It was like I was locking heads. She kept saying, I want to make the perfect painting. So half the semester, I want to make the perfect painting. And then I realized, I thought, okay. So I went in, I said, here's your assignment. I want you to make an ugly painting. Make a horrible, just a disgusting, awful painting. After 2.5 weeks, she came back. She said, I don't know how to do that.
I can't do that. Help me do that.
Yes. So
I love it.
Well,
I love that.
But you're right. There's a way that if we do not judge ourselves in art making, whether we're professional or not, because I think you said the gold standard is this: we don't judge play. And because it's universal that play is free and free of judgment, well, we can do it with abandon.
And that doesn't mean that we don't problem solve, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That doesn't mean if something doesn't work, I wouldn't want to mislead people, that if something doesn't work, we don't find another way around it, right?
Yes.
And when we play, we do that too. If we can't go over something, we go around something. If we can't get around something, we stand on it and jump over it. We find alternate ways. And that's the same way that we're doing it as we're working in our arts projects and our creative aging. Is just incredibly exciting work.
Oh, I can see that. The thing about play, you're right. And I'm glad you brought that up. It is critical thinking.
Yeah.
It is critical thinking. It's problem solving. But with play takes out the ego. Play removes self-consciousness. And once you do that, the freedom to play with ideas. Some of the best ideas come when you start throwing things around, thinking, oh, I never thought, because we're open. It's an invitation to the universe to rearrange our mental furniture and allow us to be creative.
I also really think about it reaching into that unconscious part of our brain that we keep ourselves separated from. Where that's where we open those doors to thoughts and ideas and textures and colors and compositions and maybes that we have, that front part of our brain says, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. Oh, yes, you can.
Yes. Well, Teaching and learning can happen anytime, anywhere, physical place or a Zoom. There's no expiration date. All that is needed is a desire to learn and a mind that can ask and hold the deeper questions. In fact, that is what your classes allow older adults to do.
Thank you. I think they do that. They step in. It opens up opportunity to do things, to try things that they maybe never had the time economically were unable to do. There's
Yes.
this, and we're talking about that flattening of the playing field. It allows them to participate in this creative process in a way that many of them have not done it specifically in this way. And they value it. They value it so deeply. We do exhibitions. Every time we do a class, so we physically exhibit, and I've had their work at MCAD in the galleries there. If we find our way around COVID, we will have it back out in public. It's always been my goal to get it out in the community where the Common Bond facilities are, into the rec centers and the park centers and the small galleries, because every little suburb has these galleries now, can host the work. And it is up online. You're right. There's always this option for these galleries to be up online.
So when Parker Palmer wrote, quote, "Good teaching cannot be reduced to technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and integrity of the teacher." It's clear, Lynda, he was talking about you. The way you have touched so many lives. I started by saying that I know firsthand just the students who are in the world, the artist teachers, students that went on to be architects, designers, and that trail goes back to you.
To us, to all of us that have given so much and cared so deeply about what an artful world is, that human beings are creative problem solvers. No matter how they think of themselves, every human being is a creative person. It is part of our DNA to be a creative human being, and to acknowledge that that's what teachers do.
It is. So, Lynda, thank you for this wonderful, wonderful discussion. And hey, listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, please hit subscribe and tell your friends. And word of mouth really helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.